Nice introduction. Thank you guys for coming, and thanks to the Institute for Leadership and Service for having me. I graduated from Valpo here in 2008, and when I was a student here, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had parents who were a lawyer and a pharmaceutical researcher, and I had a lot of pressure from home to figure out what I wanted to do. But when I was in college, I just didn't really feel like I had any idea. I wasn't quite sure if I had a calling in life. I didn't feel like I had one, and I wasn't sure if I was doing something wrong or if I was doing something right, and so I really struggled with that. So when I was here, I went to the Career Center to have them try and help me figure out what I wanted to do. And one of the first days that I went there, I received a little homework assignment that some ideas for me to reflect on and ponder and try to figure out, and the assignment was to picture what I pictured my life being when I was 30, 40, 50, and so sorry. No, that's okay. I'll just read it to you. So my first reflection from the Career Center that I went when I was envisioning my future 20, 30 years from now was, when I envision my future, I don't really see anything. So I hadn't made much progress, so I kept going. And the next time that I went, I have all these reflections still on my computer, which I'll probably know if they were. But my reflection was, so pretty much, I'm looking for something that's challenging / intellectually stimulating. I'd also like to be helping a greater good in some way, or at least not contributing to problems. So super vague, but we kept working. And one of the last entries that I had from this homework assignment was, I have this vision of holding little orphans in a foreign orphanage. I see those children as feeling lonely and being abandoned by their parents, and I see myself as being able to communicate, to be able to hold them and just communicate to them that they're loved. But I also get very excited about making structural / governmental changes because I see the oppression being done to people because of this, and I feel like this is a way to make changes. So this was a really big tension in a lot of my life, and it's something that I still kind of wrestle with. So while I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up when I was 20, I also got really involved in Social Action Leadership Team, or SALT. And in fact, SALT is the first place that I learned that Jesus said anything in the Bible about helping people that were poor, or marginalized, or vulnerable. So SALT was really important for me. It challenged me to look at the world through different people's lenses and embrace some of its greatness. Growing up, it was normal for me and my family to go on family vacations. I got a car when I turned 16. I spent a lot of time babysitting for my neighbors' kids, and I really didn't realize that this wasn't a universal way to experience life. I read books about people that looked like me. I saw characters on TV that looked like me. I watched movies with people who looked like me. I spoke the language surrounding myself. I didn't know anyone living in poverty. I wasn't friends with anyone that was black or brown. And of the 1,000 students that went to my high school, 995 of us were white. And I know that because I can name the 5 kids that weren't. So I didn't consciously realize that the way I was experiencing life wasn't universal. So SALT introduced me to famous people that were questioning some of these things, like Shane Claiborne, and SALT also introduced me to not famous people questioning these things, like other Valpo students. So if you remember from my career reflections, the only thing I could kind of envision was working internationally and working at an orphanage. So after studying abroad my junior year in Ecuador, I decided that I wanted to go abroad again. So one day I came across NPH here on campus, and I was hooked. NPH, or Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, would be commonly known as an orphanage, but it's actually a home and a family. If you don't speak Spanish, that means our little brothers and sisters, but I'm just going to refer to it as NPH because that's the acronym in Spanish and that's what we call it. So kids come to NPH for a variety of reasons. Most of them had orphaned or abandoned by their parents, and a lot of kids come with multiple siblings and have a pretty big family network. But the cool thing about NPH is that because the kids come and there's so many siblings, they don't get adopted out so that they're able to have security in this new NPH family. NPH is currently raising 3,400 children in Latin America and the Caribbean in 9 different countries, and each country and each home has between 100 and 700 children. I love NPH. I spent 1.5 years volunteering for them after college, and I spent 3 years for them fundraising here in the US. I love NPH because the kids don't age out, so they don't get kicked out when they're 18, they can go on to college, they can go on to become a doctor, and as long as they want to keep going to school, that's cool. I also love NPH because every kid has an opportunity to become certified in some kind of a trade in middle school. So even if they don't go on to high school, or even if they do, they learn how to be a seamstress or how to make shoes and have some kind of a tangible skill that they can fall back on if other things don't work out for them. And I also love NPH because kids maintain relationships with their extended families. a lot of kids come to NPH and still have grandparents or still have cousins and aunts and uncles who love them but just can't care for them. And so when they come and join the NPH family, they're able to maintain those bonds. I live in NPH because it works. It makes a really big difference in the kids' lives, and it's made a huge impact in my own. So before I continue, I'm going to show you a short video about NPH so that you can picture some of the places that I'm going to talk about.
Aquí aprendo a arreglar autos.
Módeme más y más. Aquí en el taller de energía aprendí a soldar. Aquí tendré la oportunidad de estudiar ingeniería industrial. Aquí aprendo arte. Here I learn English.
Aquí aprendo a hacer pan.
Aquí tengo muchas tareas.
One of the most important things of our core mission is education. Education is key to break the cycle of poverty. That's very important for us. We provide not only basic education, but we also provide higher education for those who are able to study. We have our own schools. The children also feel secure in those schools because if you go out in the different public schools, you have strikes and you go without studying for a month or two. We also offer the community around us the opportunity to attend our schools.
Education is very important for us, especially for NPH, because our children are coming from very extreme situations. We get many children who are 10, 11, 12 years old who've never been to school. We have children who have gone through a period of malnutrition that has affected their academic abilities. So we really need to look at education in a wider picture.
No solamente la educación formativa dentro de una escuela formal, sino también la educación en valores, la educación religiosa, ¿verdad? Que ellos tengan una educación integral, pues que no solamente lleguen a ser grandes profesionales, sino que lleguen a ser grandes seres humanos. Y muchos de esos principios se logran en la escuela.
For somebody who is very gifted, we want him or her to develop his or her talents, but not only then go out and use it for him or herself. The father wasn't successful always. Once our children leave NPH, how do they respond to the needs within their communities? Do they become leaders in their communities? Do they help others to become better?
A veces no todos los niños traen tal vez las aptitudes para ir a la universidad, pero sí tratamos de darles las herramientas básicas para que ellos puedan, cuando salgan de la casa, puedan trabajar en un taller.
Our societies don't provide a lot of opportunities. And in order to leave NPH, become an adult who can live in an independent way, you need to have a lot of skills. So part of our investment is in the practical skills, because a lot of the economies in our countries are still small shops where things are made by hand. And so we teach our kids that independently from whether they want to continue with higher education or not. One of the beautiful things at NPH is our children can go all the way through the university. Once they graduate, those who want to come back and serve the family.
My name is Marilyn Antunes. I grew up here and I was actually one of the first 4 pequeños here in Honduras. I'm actually an orthopedic surgeon and I'm working here in the Holy Family Surgery Center. I really thank NPH because they gave me the opportunity to study. I feel so proud of myself and I'm happy that I had this opportunity, and that really changed my life. I really love what I do. I love helping others that are in need. I thank NPH for that, and I thank everybody that has the faith that they will change a life and will change it for better.
So that gives you a little idea about what NPH is, and I always love watching those videos when I know a lot of these often look the same, but when you know some of the people in them, it feels really different. So 6 weeks after I graduated from here at Valpo, I got on a plane and headed to Honduras. I really wanted to try living out some of the ideas that I was thinking about in college. I wanted to try living in community. I wanted to put some ideas of love and service into action. I wanted to become fluent in Spanish, and I wanted to work with children and serve other people. The second day that I got to Honduras, we celebrated Mass, and I was sitting in this amphitheater of 500 children. The kids were wearing their best jeans and t-shirts. The boys' hair was all slicked back with gel, and the girls all had their hair combed into neat ponytails. My Spanish was pretty good, but I'd never been to Mass in Spanish before, so I didn't really know what was going on and was kind of unfamiliar with the religious language. So mostly I just tried to stand up and sit down at the right times and would pick out the words that I could. But at one point in the middle of the service, a group of kids picked up a bunch of beans and rice and eggs and brought it down to the altar. And I'd never been to a church before where that happened. And I just started thinking, is this a Honduran thing? Is this a Catholic thing? Is this an NPH thing? Was there something about this in the sermon that I missed? And I know you're not supposed to talk in church, but I just couldn't help myself. So I leaned down to the little boy that I was sitting next to and tried to quietly whisper, what's that for? And he just looked up at me and said, for the poor. So my day job when I was in Honduras was teaching English to preschools through 3rd graders. And I'd worked with children quite a bit before going to Honduras, but I had never taught in Spanish, and I had never managed a classroom in Spanish. And English wasn't a required subject as far as the Honduran government was concerned, so there wasn't a set curriculum that I needed to follow. And although I'd gone to school for 17 years at this point in my life, I really had no idea how or what to teach. And we live in a culture where there's this myth that teaching is really easy, but I assure you, if you've ever unsuccessfully tried to teach someone something, or if you've ever sat through a bad teacher, you also understand that this is only a myth. So in Honduras, each class was filled with kids that had just arrived at the home to kids that had been there since they were babies. Some of them loved English, some of them hated English. Some of them would sit there really quietly and raise their hands when they wanted to talk, and others of them would literally hang from the bars that separated the windows from the outside. And the classroom teacher would often take a break when I went in for English, and the doors in the schools could lock from the inside and the outside, so she would just lock us in the classroom so that the kids wouldn't run away while I was in there. And I tried to use my best teacher voice and my best teacher Spanish, but I was really just more concerned that I didn't completely embarrass myself, because that's what I kind of felt like I was doing. So those are some of the bars on the windows. And those were some of my students that look real cute, but could be interesting. So on nights and the weekends, I worked with the preteen girls, and it really didn't start out much better than the school did. I really had this idea that I was going down there to serve these kids, but most of the early interactions with the girls were forms of, Tezra, I really like your coat, will you give that to me when you go? Or, Tezra, I like your shoes, can I have those? Or, Tezra, you're so pretty, will you give me your cell phone? And that was not how I expected my year to start out, because I would just think, okay, seriously, like, I'm here to be helpful, what is going on? And you're probably wondering, why would the kids be asking you for all your stuff right when you get there? And the reason is that a lot of us that come here from the US and from Europe, we have a lot of things. We have a lot more possessions than the kids do. We have houses back at home full of things, but most of the kids' belongings fit into a small locker. And so when you're coming and you see that, you have this natural inclination to want to share your things. But it was really annoying being asked for my things. And I just kept thinking that in this giant family, I was serving as one of the caregivers. And I would imagine my own imaginary future children and just think, I wouldn't want them asking people they just met for their things. Because these kids, they weren't living on the streets, they weren't starving, they were well cared for, they were loved. But we foreigners coming down had created this culture where we would walk around and pass out candy or give away the things that didn't fit in our suitcases. And it felt really good for us, but it made the kids decide that they were just going to start laying claim to the stuff before we even would give it to them. And it really opened my eyes to how nuanced our notions of charity can be and what this can look like in practice. I never thought before about how giving something away could have negative consequences, and it certainly didn't for the givers. I think a lot of us felt really good about it, but for the caregivers who had to live with the kids afterwards, they were really frustrated by it. So a few weeks later in Mass, the gospel lesson for the week was from Matthew. You've probably seen this verse before. And the point that stuck out for me most was at the end, where they say, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And the reason that this was important this day in Honduras is because this is actually what NPH is named after. In Spanish, this verse in the Bible, least, and littlest are the same word, pequeños. So the only text in the chapel in Honduras is a giant poster of this. And when that verse was read that day, all I could think was, wow, do these kids know that they're the least of these? I mean, I'm the one down here to help the least of these, and I wonder if that's what the priest is going to preach on. Is he going to talk about that? And we got to that point in the sermon that day, and you know what he did not preach on? He didn't preach on that, because as much as I felt called to be down there and to serve, the priest let the sea of children around me know that they had the exact same call. So being in Honduras helped me have moments like this. It helped me have moments where I questioned what it meant to give away my possessions, and it allowed me to meet people behind my biases and realize that they didn't see me the same way that I saw myself. I had a similar experience a few weeks later when we were fasting. So fasting is how actually that eggs and rice and beans that I saw that first day in Mass would get to Mass each week. A group of the older kids would each give up a meal, and the uncooked food would be brought down during offering. And then that food was distributed to villages around the home by the priest. So my church growing up didn't do offering this way. I'd only been to churches before where there was some kind of basket passed around, and you put in money or you put in envelopes. And as a child, I would sometimes add to this, but you know, I wasn't giving up a meal for my offering. And this congregation was entirely made up of children, and they didn't really have money, so this is how they did offering. And the first time that I got to fast with the girls that I worked with, I was really excited, because fasting hadn't been a part of something that I did in the States, and it seemed like a really tangible good to be a part of. And so rather than the typical meal of beans and rice that arrived that night, the kids would receive a small bun and some milk, and then their portion of uncooked food would be set aside. And as I was helping serve dinner that night, and I was getting really excited about this ritual I was going to participate in, I listened to the girls come to their portion. And they would say things like, I wanted rice and beans. And then Jessica says, I'm just going to go ask my sister to share with me. And then Danya chimes in, that's not the spirit of fasting. And then Stephanie would complain, my bun's dry. And then Jimena would say, we're doing this so poor kids can eat. And as I listened to the girls, I began to realize that I'd really romanticized this ritual, but that underneath this offering was far more complex than it had seemed to me. But that Saturday at Mass, the kids still brought up the food that they hadn't eaten, and someone else was still able to eat it. 3 months before I left my position at NPH, a little girl named Sonia joined the home. She was 10, and she had a younger sister with a severe developmental disability. They'd been living in a government orphanage for a number of years. That was only supposed to be a temporary situation, and the home was notorious for its poor conditions, and they'd been there for years. So one day we were talking about birthdays, and Sonia mentioned that she didn't know when hers was. This was actually really common for kids who got to NPH. When I first got there, I asked all the kids for their birthdays so that I could bake them a cake. This was a tradition that volunteers had started, and the kids insisted continue for obvious reasons. And a number of the kids quickly shrugged when I asked them, and other of the kids would say, Tezra, she's new, she doesn't know when her birthday is. And I had a really hard time grasping this at first, that a 12-year-old wouldn't know when their birthday was. But it's really common for kids that grow up in poverty to not know that. So one day Sonia and I were talking about birthdays, and she mentioned that she didn't know when hers was. And some of the kids actually had birth certificates, but they just never seen them, and they never knew when their birthday was. And then other kids just didn't have a birth certificate at all, so then they just got assigned January 1st. So I visited the social work office one afternoon to see which category Sonia fell into, and she did have a birth certificate. Her birthday was December 27th. And I was super excited to tell her, but it also felt like this really strange power to have, that you know someone's birthday and they don't, and they want to know it. And I wasn't quite sure if there should be some kind of formality around telling her this, or what you do with that information. But I just decided to tell her the next time I see her. So the next time I saw her, I told her, and she got so excited, and she just kept saying, December 27th, December 27th, my birthday is December 27th. And when December 27th came around that year, we celebrated her 11th birthday. And it was the first time in her life that she'd celebrated. So a few weeks later after that, we were organizing some of the paperwork in the home, and the kids were getting ready to start school in February, and Sonia's birth certificate, there wasn't a copy of it. So someone ran to the social work office to get it. And they came back and they said, Sonia, your birthday's December 27th. And she pretty snidely responded, oh, I know, even though she'd known for about 2 months. And then they finished by saying, 1997, you're 12. No, I'm not. She said, I'm 11. They said, no, you're born in 1997, you're 12. And in a second, she lost an entire year of her life. And I just kept reflecting on that moment and thinking, how could no one in the 5 years that she'd been living in the system in Honduras bother to tell this girl that she was a year older than she thought that she was? And we've never never talked about that, but I would always reflect on that and just think how different our lives were at 12. And that was really kind of the theme of my time in Honduras. Day after day, week after week, month after month, I kept on confronting so many ways that I had just taken for granted as the normal way to live life, but I learned that I didn't have the only way to do something. So as you're on your own journey of thinking about how to make things right, I strongly encourage you to not do as much as you try to listen and try to learn. So I know that this talk is entitled Getting Paid to Make Things Right, and so far I've been telling you about volunteering, and that doesn't pay very well. So I'll get to the getting paid part in a little bit. But about the making things right, I also just wanted to let you know that I really have no idea if my actions are making the world a better place. I really hope that they do, but I also just really try to embody in my work and in my volunteering is to listen to the people that I feel this call to help and try to understand what they're asking for before I presume to know and presume to help. And as I got to know the kids in Honduras, I just couldn't get over the fact that they were born as they were and I was born as me, and that our lives would be totally different if it was switched. So, okay, the getting paid part of this now. Since I know some of you are struggling probably with wondering if you can actually get paid to follow your passions after college or if that's just being dreamy. A lot of my path has been in the nonprofit world, but using your passions to make the world a better place does not mean that you have to work in a nonprofit. And there's probably actually a lot of nonprofits that aren't making the world a better place, and you also can work in a nonprofit and not have any passion. So for me in practice, I worked at a family resource center in Colorado when I first returned home from Honduras. Actually, when I first returned home from Honduras, I worked as a receptionist in a car dealership in Colorado because I really, really needed a job. And at this point in my life, I didn't have a car, I only had a bike. And so I would bike to work at the car dealership every day, but it's a car dealership, so they didn't have bike racks. So then I would have to bring my bike inside and store it with all the car parts. And they kept trying to convince me to buy a car. So I only worked there for 4 months, and then I found another job. And I was working at a family resource center in Colorado, so I got to help kids with things that they needed outside of school, like food or winter clothes or glasses, so that they could do well in school. And one of the things that helped me get that job was that I spoke Spanish. And they were pretty excited about my volunteer experience in Honduras, too. Those are actually two things that most job interviews that I go to, people comment on and are excited about. So after that, I got my master's in social work at the University of Michigan. When I was here, I studied psychology and Spanish, like they said in the introduction, and I always figured I'd have to go to grad school for something. And it was actually from another Valpo alum who was a Salter who was doing the MSW program that really encouraged me to apply to that. And that program was really important for a lot of the same ways for me that SALT was, is that in this academic setting, I really got to think about my reality and think about how we're trying to make the world a better place. And I was really challenged and pushed and also supported by a lot of my colleagues that were in the same position. And the social work degree hasn't led for me to any specific job. I didn't want to be a clinical social worker, so a lot of people get an MSW because they want to go into therapy. I focused on a more macro track, but I think that the philosophy that it instilled in me has been really important for the kind of jobs that I've pursued after. I've had a couple other opportunities along the way too, but I'm not going to go into all that because it'll get really long. So most recently, I was also doing fundraising for the same organization, NPH, here in the US. And it was great because I could tell funders about my experience in Honduras, or donors about my experience in Honduras, and they were really excited about that. But working in an office is working in an office, and it's not always that fun. But I think some of my favorite parts of the job were being able to lead trips to the home and letting other people experience this way of life, and also remove some of the lenses that they were wearing from the US that maybe they didn't realize that they were wearing. This June, I led a week-long trip to Honduras. And the group had come from all over the country, so we did a little bit of virtual prep before the trip, but we hadn't all been together until we got to Honduras. And I think a lot of people just came on the trip because someone encouraged them to, and so they hopped on the plane not knowing too much and got there and were there. So the second night we were doing reflections, and I was sitting around just trying to listen, take into what the participants were saying, and it just turned really negative all of a sudden. We were talking about just what you'd seen that day and what you'd experienced, and people started saying things like, it really bothered me when they didn't let the kids eat dinner. Or, it's really wrong that they don't let them talk at mealtime. Don't they understand that that's developmentally important for the kids? Or they'd say things like, I can't believe those kids are macheteing. They are way too young to be using machetes. That is so dangerous. And I was a little bit taken aback at first and not quite sure how to respond. But then I remembered that none of the people on the trip spoke Spanish. And they were looking at this community, expecting it to be their own community, but it wasn't. So throughout the rest of the week, we had some of the kids come and share their stories. We had some of the caregivers come and share their stories. We had some of the staff come and share their stories. And people, it kind of started to change. Because the kids weren't eating dinner because they probably hadn't washed their hands yet. And it's important to wash your hands before you eat because otherwise you're going to spread germs. And if you're a parent, you probably understand that sometimes getting kids to wash their hands or brush your teeth is going to be really seamless, or it's going to turn into World War III and you just don't know what's going to happen. But the kids were just not eating dinner because the food was being withheld from them. Or some people that were upset about the quietness at dinner time. I don't know if any of you have ever lived with 80 other children, but when you live with 80 other people constantly, it is super, super loud. And dinner time was the only time during the day where there was a little bit of peace and a little bit of quiet. And it was really nice for the kids to be able to eat in that silence. And macheting the grass is how they cut the grass in Honduras. There's a lot of grass to be cut, and when you have to make a choice between employing someone to cut the grass or buying more food, you're probably going to buy more food. And when you've got kids that are going to grow up and leave the home and be prepared to have their own home someday, if they don't learn to cut the grass there with a machete, where are they going to learn that skill? So it was really fun to be part of this process and see people experience some of these things. But working for NPH was also really challenging for me at times. I'd have a lot of phone calls with things where someone would call and say, "Hi, we sponsor Juan in Mexico, and we got something from you saying that his birthday is November 22nd, but he just sent us a letter saying that he celebrated on May 2nd, and he said his sister's name is Isabella, and you told us that his sister's name is Maria. So is this real? Why are we sending you money? Do you just have a factory of children writing all these letters?" And then you'd have to kind of respond all those things that I had experienced over the phone and say things like, "Well, you know, I bet when he came, that's when they thought his birthday was, but they found his birth certificate, so that probably is his real birthday that he wrote to you in the letter. And his sister's name is actually Maria Isabella, it looks like, but in this home, the kids think of their first name and second name a little bit differently than we do in the US, and sometimes they go by the second name, and they don't think of it as different." And people weren't always sure if they wanted to keep giving you money because they weren't sure if they wanted to believe you. And it was really frustrating and it was really hard. And people can donate their money however they want. That's everyone's own right. But it was really difficult to be on the receiving end and to know the tangible good that you were doing and have someone say something to you like, "You know, you just didn't call. You just didn't answer the phone when I called, so I don't know if we can keep on donating to this organization." So I've also been volunteering for the past 3 years teaching English. And 2 summers ago, I was teaching on Tuesday nights, and my birthday happened to fall on a Tuesday night. And I thought it'd be kind of a fun cultural experience to have a birthday party in my class. So we started learning the song Happy Birthday. We'd sing it every week. We talked about what a birthday was. And on my actual birthday, I brought a cake. I led everyone in singing Happy Birthday to myself. And we cut the cake and had a little party at the end. And then when I finished, I noticed that one of my students was animatedly talking to another student in her native language. And she just turned to me and says, "Oh, teacher, I'm explaining to her what a birthday is." Which I was super confused because I felt like I did all the right teacher things when I introduced birthday. We went around the room and we all said our birthdays. Everyone knew what the word happy meant. We'd been talking about this for a couple of weeks, when you celebrate this, when you sing this song. And so I was super confused how this had been missed on the student. And my student finished, "I was telling them what a birthday is, that this is the day you were born." And that's when it clicked for me. Because when we'd gone around that room that day and said our birthdays, I said June 9th, and every single other student in the class had said January 1st. Because all of the students were refugees in this class, and they hadn't known their birthdays. They knew the year, but they didn't know the date. So to them, birthday was the same category as a phone number was, just something that you fill in on a form. And a lot of my students at the English Learning Center are refugees. And there's been a lot of talk about that in the news recently. And I just can't help but wonder if my experience there, knowing some of their names, knowing some of their stories, has colored my perception of what it means to be a refugee and has influenced that. Because I just keep thinking that if I had 10 minutes to leave my house and I knew that it was a choice between running on foot and hopefully surviving or maybe being murdered, that I would choose to run. And I would just really hope that there would be someone else, should I get sent to another country, willing to teach me whatever new language. So I've been loving doing that so much that I decided that I wanted to get paid to do that and could volunteer doing something else. So this fall I started a Master's in Education program for ESL. And I don't think I'm going to be a teacher forever. I don't imagine this will be my lifelong career, but I do really hope to couple some of the education and the MSW skills that I've gained and do some advocacy work at a different point. So if I had to give you guys a couple tangible tips about what you can actually do to get paid for your passion, this is what I wish someone would have told me when I was a student. The first thing is to go and be in community, someplace that's dramatically different from what you call normal, because it's going to confirm and challenge your deepest held beliefs, and it's going to shatter your stereotypes. And it's going to make you that much more critical consumer of information. I really can't emphasize this enough. And you probably don't have to go far. You could stay in Valparaiso, Indiana, and find communities of people that are different than you. And secondly, listen. Listen, 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 which I know this time of year is really hard. But one of my favorite quotes by Wade Davis is, "Other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They're unique manifestations of the human spirit." And we're never going to hear those manifestations without listening. Number 3, don't keep your passion a secret. Let people know who you care about. And I say who because I think it's easy to think in terms of problems and have issues, but as Shane Claiborne says, these issues have faces. We're talking not about ideas, but about human emergencies. Don't choose issues, choose people. Fall in love with a group of people who are marginalized and suffering, and then you won't have to worry about which cause you need to protest. The issues will choose you. And when you think about this, this is actually called networking a lot of times, and I think it's thought of as this thing where you've got to go out and shake lots of hands and meet in a bar, but it really just means letting other people know who you care about and what you're interested in, because you are probably a lot more connected than you realize, and the people around you want to see you succeed. So share with people what you want to do. And then number 4, getting paid for your passion is really messy. I think the beauty of volunteering for your passion is that you can choose to do it. You're volunteering. And the messy part about getting paid for your passion is that things become a lot less fun when you have to do them. When it's your job, you're going to have tasks you dislike, you're going to have coworkers you don't get along with, you're going to have bosses you disagree with, and I think it can deflate your passion from your passion sometimes. So don't enter this lightly. And just because you like volunteering for something doesn't mean you're going to like getting paid for it. You might like being able to do it because you can choose to do it and choose not to do it. So be thoughtful with your passions. So again, I'd just like to thank the Institute for Service and Leadership for having me and for you guys for coming. And if you guys have any questions at all, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.